Hey guys, Will here. So as you can see, we're right in the middle of building our Track Racer TR160 cockpit, and there will be a full review as well as an assembly video coming very soon to the channel. But I wanted to sort of take a moment here to pause. I felt like we were at a good stage in the build to run you through some of my tips for assembling pretty much any aluminium profile cockpit. So we've assembled a few here now on the channel. We've done a SimLabs one, we've done the Track Racer one, we've done a Racecraft Simulations one as well. And there's a few sort of tips and traps that I think a lot of people fall into, particularly based on what I see people asking questions about a lot of times in Facebook groups and places like that. So we'll run you through today some of my quick tips for making the process as easy and painless as possible. And most of it all boils down to just sort of establishing points of reference for measurement as you're going through. You don't need a whole lot of tools necessarily to do this. There's a couple of little things that we can do to make it nice and easy. So the first thing that I like to use is this little, I don't even know what you call it. I guess it's kind of like a set square, but it's a spirit level as well as a little adjustable ruler thing here that you can lock into position. And the locking into position is really important because what this allows us to do is it allows us to take measurements on one side and then check that they're exactly the same on the other side as well. So say for example, we want to measure the height of our pedal plate. What we can do is we can put that on there, put it on there, lock it in. And obviously we do have the spirit level there too, so we can see that that is completely flat. But then if we flip it over to the other side, we can see very quickly if there's any discrepancy in the height adjustment there. So we've used that throughout the build, and you'll see when you watch the build video later on, we did things like, if you come down here and have a look, we did things like using it to make sure that we had our upright completely square with the back here, so you can see the edge of the brackets line up completely. And again, we can flip that over to the other side and check exactly the same thing on this side as well. We did the same thing again when we were adjusting our seat rails. So say for example over here, making sure that that matches that exactly. And it just provides a really, really easy way to make sure that everything's square as you go along. And I think the most important thing when you're building one of these cockpits is to just, measure, I guess as they say, measure twice and cut once. You really want to make sure that everything is absolutely perfect as you go, because one little mistake at one point can throw everything else out later on. You can imagine with this part, if we'd got this part slightly off center, then when we measured the spacing for these guys, they would have been slightly out. Pedal plate would have been slightly out. And then what happens is when you tighten everything down at the end of the build, you've got a twisted cockpit and nothing lines up properly. Things end up stripping threads and cross-threading, and it just creates an absolute nightmare. So just come down underneath the seat here as well. I just wanted to show you a couple of other things. So another quick tip in reference specifically to mounting corner brackets like the one you see here is you always want to make sure that you have your bolts as far out towards the outside of the bracket as possible. You can imagine, and this is a perfect example you can see here. In this case, the bolt that's going through the side into our aluminium rail here, or our channel, is in a fixed position, so we can't move that up or down. But the one on this side, because it's sitting in a channel running lengthways, we can move that forward and back. Now what happens is if you have that bolt mounted further in, then you're no longer able to tighten it. And what I've seen a lot of people do is they'll get one bolt in, tighten it down, continue the build up the seat, get everything else mounted, spend an hour doing that, and then realize, oh crap, I've buried this bolt underneath that one, and now I have no way of tightening this one down at the end. So if you always kind of try to push them towards the outside wherever possible, it just means that when you go to tighten it down, you can see obviously we can access that one with an Allen key as well as that one too. So that is another thing that I see people get wrong more often than you would expect. But another thing that I think is really important is just sort of starting off with a point of reference for every single thing that you mount. So what I mean by that is if you come around the back here, we'll start at the very back of the cockpit. So what I like to do before I even think about putting things into the position that's going to suit my particular driving style, I like to establish a point of reference. So you can see here, for example, I've mounted the back of the seat rail completely up against the channel, or completely up against the back of the aluminium profile there. And I've done exactly the same thing on both sides. So immediately there, that provides us with a point of reference so we know that the seat rails are completely square relative to the profile that they're mounted on. And that continues all the way forward. So we've done the same thing when we mounted our seat rails. We made sure that they were flush with the front of the rail there, and exactly the same on the other side as well. So that means that our seat is going to be square with our rails, which is then square with the aluminium profile that those are sitting on as well. We did the same thing here too. We made sure that our corner brackets were square in relation to this piece as well as this piece. So that is lined up exactly against the edge there and exactly against the edge there. Now, obviously these would need to adjust in and out if necessary to accommodate for the width of the seat. We were lucky in this case that the maximum width actually fit perfectly because this Track Racer rally seat is actually designed to fit on the Track Racer TR160 specifically. So if we move that forward now, we did exactly the same thing here as you saw before. We measured the point of reference here. But what we also did is we cross-checked that reference against the measurement to the front of the unit, because you can imagine if we'd measured this cross member out even slightly, if it was a couple of millimeters out, then using this as a point of reference would then throw this measurement out, which would then throw the next measurement out, and so forth. So what we did is after we measured that reference point there, we then got a tape measure and we measured from the edge of the bracket to the front of the profile, and we measured it to be 622 millimeters. And then we do exactly the same thing on this side as well. And we've got exactly 622 millimeters. So again, absolutely 100% square with multiple points of reference throughout the entire build. Now, if we move down to the pedal plate, again, we've done exactly the same thing here. Even though this pedal plate is currently in completely the wrong spot for me when I'm driving, because we're having to sort of mount it and build it in two separate halves and then join the two halves together later by mounting the pedal plate on top. We don't want to end up twisting things and sort of having to manipulate things later on. So what we've done again is use the end of the profile as a reference point. So when we've mounted the side rails, we've mounted them flush up against the edge of the profile, and we've done exactly the same thing on both sides. That means that, again, we've got that point of reference that continues throughout the entire build. And then later on, once we've joined everything together, we've joined the two sides together, everything was very, very simple. And again, you'll see this when we get into the build later on. Everything went together with absolutely no problem. We didn't have to twist things. We didn't have to pull on things. Didn't have any problems with cross-threading or anything like that. And I think that a lot of these issues that people have just come down to rushing things, not measuring twice before they bolt things down, and it always seems to lead to problems. So what we can then do once we've established all of this, once everything's nice and square, we can loosen things off, we can adjust them to our preference, we can slide them forward and back. Obviously, this wheel deck isn't going to be in the right spot for me once I get up and driving. We'll end up moving that forward or backwards. We'll end up moving the pedals back, probably even end up moving the seat rails forward on the chassis rails here. But because we've already got everything secured, everything's already tight, what that means is that when we loosen those bolts and we slide the seat forward, everything's going to move together and we're not going to end up with that twisting problem that we had before. Now, if we even move up to the aluminium posts here for our wheel deck, which we haven't quite finished mounting yet, you can see again what I've done. I've used the top of the aluminium profile as a reference point for the height, and then I've used the back of the aluminium profile here as a reference point for the offset forward and back. So I've replicated that exact same thing on both sides. And again, as you can see, once we mount the rest of the mount, it's all going to be completely square. We're not going to have any problems with twisting. And if you get everything right, you end up in a situation like this where you can see perfectly square, exactly the same on this side, should be at least, perfectly square. We've got our pedal plate, again, absolutely perfectly square. And pretty much anywhere you look on this rig, everything is going to be within, a millimeter or even a half a millimeter of perfection. And it really didn't take us any longer, maybe an extra 15 minutes in total throughout the entire build to just do these little checks throughout the way. So it's really kind of down to the mindset that you have when you're building it. You don't sort of want to guess things. You want to make sure everything's checked twice before you tighten things down. And I think if you follow these principles, you shouldn't have too many problems regardless of the aluminium profile rig that you're building. So hopefully this has helped you out. If you have any other tips that you've come across when you've been doing your own build, let us know down in the comments below. We can always include those in future videos. And if you have any other questions at all, obviously we will be covering this build in a lot more detail in an upcoming video. But yeah, if you have any other tips or suggestions or questions, let us know in the comments and I'll be sure to include that in future videos as well. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Leave a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video. Make sure you're subbed, hit the notification bell too so you don't miss the build of this crazy rig. We're going to be building up a triple 4K 65-inch wraparound display system next week as well. So it is going to be absolutely mental. Awesome time to get subbed to the channel if you aren't already. So thank you very much for watching and we'll see you again soon. Bye.